Picture this. Red and blue lights come on behind you. You pull over. The officer walks up to your window. Good afternoon. Can I see your ID? Most drivers think this is a simple request, and most drivers unknowingly make a mistake in the next few seconds that completely changes the direction of the encounter. Because the real issue isn't your ID, it's what happens immediately after. That's the decision point. The moment the officer determines whether this stays as a routine interaction or becomes a fishing expedition for more information. And if you understand that moment, you'll know exactly what to say when an officer asks for identification. Let's break it down. The trap starts because people assume every request for identification means the same thing. It doesn't. If knowing your rights matters to you, subscribe now, share this with someone who needs it, and drop your opinion below. Sometimes an officer has legal authority to require identification. Sometimes they're simply asking questions during a consensual encounter. The problem is that most people never recognize the difference. Instead, they start talking. Officer, can I see your ID? Driver, sure. Is there a problem? Officer, where are you headed today? Driver, just going home. Officer, where are you coming from? Driver, my friend's house. Officer, had anything to drink tonight? Driver, just one beer. And suddenly the conversation has moved far beyond identification. Notice what happened. The officer didn't learn anything from the ID itself. The officer learned everything from the driver's voluntary explanations. Most people believe they're helping themselves by sounding cooperative. In reality, they're creating new avenues for investigation. That's why this decision point matters so much. Now let's look at why officers ask for identification in the first place. Identification helps officers determine who they're speaking with. It helps confirm identity. It helps check for warrants. It helps verify licenses when driving is involved. It helps ensure officer safety. These are legitimate investigative objectives. But from the officer's perspective, the ID request also creates a conversation opportunity. Once people start talking, they often reveal information they never intended to share. That's not manipulation. That's simply how investigations work. People volunteer information. Officers evaluate it. And the encounter develops from there, which brings us to the exact decision point. The moment isn't when the officer asks for your ID. The moment is when you start explaining. That's where everything changes. Let's look at the wrong response. Officer, can I see your ID? Driver, sure. What did I do wrong? Officer, why are you nervous? Driver, I'm not nervous. Officer, where are you coming from? Driver, a friend's place. Officer, which friend? Driver, now the officer has a new focus. The driver's behavior, the driver's answers, the driver's consistency. The original purpose of the stop may no longer be the only issue. The conversation itself has become part of the investigation. Now let's compare that with the correct response. Officer, can I see your ID? Driver hands over identification. Officer, where are you headed today? Driver, officer, am I legally required to answer questions? That's it. That's the phrase. Officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Simple, polite, non-confrontational, and most importantly, it forces clarity. Officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Memorize that sentence, because it changes the entire dynamic. Notice what it does. It doesn't argue. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't challenge authority. It simply asks whether compliance is legally required. Now, the officer has to make a choice. If the answer is yes, you'll know the officer is asserting legal authority. If the answer is no, you've identified the interaction as voluntary. Either way, you've gained information without providing any. That's why the decision point is so powerful. Most people rush to answer. Smart drivers seek clarification first. Now let's talk about what happens next. Many officers will continue the conversation. Officer, it's just a simple question. Driver, officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Officer, why don't you want to answer? Driver, officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Notice the pattern. You're not refusing aggressively. You're not debating. You're calmly returning to the same issue, whether answering is legally required. Another common response might sound like this. Officer, if you've got nothing to hide, why not answer? This is where many people lose control of the encounter. They begin defending themselves, explaining themselves, justifying themselves, and the conversation expands again. Instead, stay focused. Officer, if you've got nothing to hide, why not answer? Driver, officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Same response. Same calm tone. No argument, no hostility, no extra information. The reason this works is because it keeps the encounter centered on legal obligations rather than voluntary disclosures. And that's a critical distinction. Now let's briefly discuss the legal foundation. In the United States, courts have long recognized that citizens generally cannot be compelled to answer every question an officer asks. Requirements vary depending on the circumstances. A lawful traffic stop is different from a casual street encounter. State laws may differ. Specific situations may create additional obligations, but the general principle remains consistent. Providing information because the law requires it is different from providing information voluntarily. The phrase we're discussing helps identify which situation you're actually facing, and that's the key. Not winning an argument, not proving a point, simply understanding whether the question requires an answer. Because once people start volunteering information, they often lose track of what was mandatory and what was optional. That's exactly where the decision point occurs. Not when the officer approaches, not when the lights come on, not when the ID is requested. The decision point happens the moment you start explaining yourself. That's the moment the encounter either stays focused or expands. So let's recap. The trap is believing the ID request is just about identification. The reality is that many drivers begin volunteering information immediately afterward. The decision point occurs when you're tempted to explain. That's where the encounter changes direction. And the phrase to remember is simple. Officer, am I legally required to answer questions? Use it calmly. Use it respectfully. Use it consistently. Because the smartest drivers aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who recognize the decision point before the officer does.